all our attendees hopping on. We're just getting set up. We'll get started in a few minutes. We've got a few folks jumping on. For those of you joining us, we're just waiting for people to come in, and then we'll go ahead and get started in just a few minutes.
Sure. Bruce, you look like you're praying there. Bruce, are you praying or you get your head down?
Yeah. I don't want to be accused of resting my eyes like Joe Biden. That's what I was praying.
Okay, all right. Prayers of the righteous. Michael, nice to meet you also. I don't know you, but it's a pleasure to meet you.
Same here.
Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Serendipity.
Maybe one day I can be able to share the story how I met you.
You can share the story.
It was just funny, man. It blew me away. I saw someone walking up the street, and I'm on the cell phone, and I'm talking, and I looked and I see him, and something saying, "Pay attention to this guy." He the only guy I see, white guy walking through the neighborhood. He just was humble as I don't know what. And when he started talking, and I listened to him, and I said, "Hold on, you're the guy?" He said, "Sure, me." That's something in the community that you don't see that much. You don't see, people actually out there into the struggle. And when I saw him, he was doing all the footwork himself, and I thought that was real interesting. And I said, you know what? This guy is really serious. Something about him, I think he's gonna be somebody real good for the people. And when I went to talking with him, he took the time and started talking with me and sharing. He said, not only, call me, take my personal number. So that was real good for me. That was real good. And I watched him walk from door to door by himself, nobody else with him. And I thought that was what the community needs. So I said, this guy here, I'll follow this guy. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Great story.
It's nice to go out there and have people who are really interested in or engaging you in the conversation.
Yeah, that's what people look for. That's what people look for.
Michael, when people see me in the street, they run the other way. So I don't know.
Oliver, you're on mute.
If I got to go to my car and put it on my charger, I didn't realize I didn't have that much power, but it won't go out. So if I have to go to the car, then I'm kind of moving around at an event. If it gets real low, I'll be in the car with it charging, okay? Because I don't have my other charger here to plug it in. So if you see me moving, have we started yet?
Not yet.
Okay, all right. I think I'm gonna go do that now, so I can make sure I have power.
All right, y'all. Everyone want to go ahead and get started? We've got some folks that have joined us. For everyone that's here, welcome to the Alternatives to Incarceration Town Hall. We're going to be talking a lot about, obviously, alternatives to incarceration and just criminal justice reform in general today. So if everyone would like to, if all our panelists would like to go around and introduce themselves, just your name, where you're working at. Yeah, that would be great. Michael, do you want to start?
Okay, sure. My name is Michael Simmons. I own and operate the Master Watch. From here, from New Orleans, born and raised. I also mentor at-risk young adults. I'm also a life coach for Jefferson Parish, Judge Schlegel, and I also just hire convicted felons, providing opportunities for them because I know how hard it is to try to get a job. So started the business for that.
Perfect. Thank you. Kelly, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, my name is Kelly Orians. I'm the co-executive director of the 472 Plus. We're a holistic reentry services organization that helps formerly incarcerated people and their families make the transition home from prison. And it's our goal to empower those most impacted by the criminal justice system to help lead the way in creating, to reimagine public safety and reimagine what it means to protect our communities.
That's awesome. Chuck, would you like to go?
Sure. My name is Reverend Chuck Morse. I'm the Executive Director of Thrive New Orleans. At Thrive, our role is to help people, especially ex-offenders, go from surviving to thriving once they are released. We have 4 pillars of our program. One is affordable housing. We have several ex-offenders that live in our affordable housing. We also have workforce development. So we help many ex-offenders with opportunities to learn and to really be able to develop a skill, whether it's green infrastructure, whether it's A+ training or CDL licensing. So we do the workforce piece. We also understand that sometimes ex-offenders have a hard time finding jobs to pay them their worth. So we also help them start small businesses through our Launch NOLA Small Business Academy. And we are also a partner of First 72 and many other folks. We have a community center in the 9th Ward where we do mentoring. We have basketball leagues. We have workforce training for parents, but also we have places and things for kids to do, and we train people with SAT and ACT training also. So holistically, we support community, but also ex-offenders are a major part of the folks that we support.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Mr. Bruce, you want to go?
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Pastor McClue, and I pastor the Mount Carmel Baptist Church in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, and also I'm the president of the New St. John Missionary Baptist Association. I've been with many reentry programs for a long time. Possibly Oliver remember this one. I sat on the executive board of the Christian Community Youth Against Drugs Foundations in the early 90s with Pastor Thomas Taylor. I've worked with several reentry programs for training, and I actually actively engage reentry people or people who have been incarcerated to train them for environmental jobs. So we're looking to work with Chuck with workforce development and with other programs within the city that's already established, and possibly to train people to go do storm cleanup in the western part of our state because it's going to be needed. So I've been doing this for the last 30 years. Again, I'm a native New Orleans, born and reared in the upper 9th Ward of the city.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Graham, you want to go ahead?
Sure. My name is Graham Bosworth. I am a criminal defense attorney. I do public defender work. I am former team leader of the Louisiana Sentencing Commission. I'm the current co-chair, actually, at this point, of the Louisiana Bar Association's Criminal Justice Committee. I'm the former judge pro tempore of Criminal District Court Section D, and I'm the current candidate for Criminal District Court Section D.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oliver, would love to hear from you.
You're on mute, Oliver.
Muted.
Oliver Thomas, host of the Good Morning Show on WBOK. I work for a engineering, structural, civil firm, Stewart Consulting, for the last several years. Do a lot of it, business development, hazard mitigation. Been involved in the community a long time. Ex-offender, dedicated to criminal justice reform. Fan of Pastor McClue and anybody who's a descendant of Pastor Taylor. Great man that a lot of people really don't know about, who kind of started this work a long time ago. And just a fan of Graham Bosworth for his work with not just sentencing reform. The segment he's done on my show on WBOK the last several years, and the work that he's doing now, as well as all of the other men and women who are part of this this particular panel, that just excited to be able to do this work and also have this discussion.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I think this is, such an important conversation. And before we really jump into community questions, I'd love to go around real quick and just hear very briefly why each of you got into this work. If we want to, Kelly, do you want to get started?
Sure. So I first started doing criminal justice reform work about 12 years ago in New Orleans for the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana, which since merged with Juvenile Regional Services and is now the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. And we were trying in the practice of sentencing juveniles to life without the possibility of parole. Thanks to a lot of community organizing work, leadership at the state legislature, and two major Supreme Court rulings, we've dramatically scaled back the use of that sentence, and has also led to the release of several dozen people who previously were sentenced to die in prison. And I had the incredible privilege to work on the legal team that helped secure the release for the 2 people who were released first in the country under the Granby, Florida ruling. But one really, which was an incredible experience and opportunity until about 30 minutes into the ride home with the gentleman who had been released after serving nearly a half century each in prison. And we were confronted with the realities of reentry and what it meant to re-enter society after being gone for so long, after having endured an incredible amount of trauma, and coming back to a city and to a community that wasn't entirely prepared to welcome them back. And so I worked as a public defender after that, and I think what I observed that was missing was an answer to that question of what was going to happen to people once they're released from prison, which I think overlaps really well in any discussion about an alternative to incarceration and how we bring justice in that circumstance, but also how we heal our communities and keep our communities together. So from there, I ended up joining the team that started the first 72 plus, and we've since we've tried to become an answer to that question of what's going to happen to folks when they return home from prison, but are increasingly working with partners at the court to figure out what can be done to prevent people from going into incarceration unless it's absolutely necessary. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bruce, do you want to jump in on this one?
Basically, it was a movement that was started by the late Reverend Thomas Taylor in the Upper Ninth Ward of our city, where we saw the disproportionate sentencing of young people of color to jail because they were addicted to drugs. And we saw that because the mood of the country was just to incarcerate people, just make it mass incarceration for any type of drug conviction or being found with drugs. And we found out a lot of them were just addicts. And they needed an alternative. They needed something alternatively to get into to help them with their addiction, because it did not only affect them, but a lot of them were mothers and fathers, so they affected their family. So incarcerating them not only incarcerated that person, but literally the family was in prison also, and became poverty stricken, and because we have the saying, it's just not the person that's doing the time, it's their family that's doing the time also. So kind of just fell right into it for some strange reason. It went from a youth revival into a movement. We just started out as a 3-day youth revival, and we just wound up at Sterling Park in the Upper Ninth Ward off of St. Claude and Albert Street. And it went from there when it exploded into a ministry of helping people. And once I started pastoring, I just started being an advocate for kids who were arrested,
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Michael.
Pretty much for me, growing up in and out of the system as a young man and as an adult as well, instead of being a problem, I wanted to figure out a way to become a solution. So I started a program, the program that I started, to be able to mentor and help young kids that didn't have the opportunity, don't have the resources, just to point to them and allow them to understand and know that there is a better way than what we see every day. The things that we see in the community, just teaching them what it is, life skills and things to be able to make a difference in life. So that's what started me. That what got me involved in it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Chuck?
Yeah, what started me, my father is an ex-felon, and he was a substance abuser. And I know what it is to be raised without a father presence continually in your life, and how that has given me trauma and has had a devastating impact on my life. And for me, I can empathize with those young people out there whose fathers may be locked up or whose fathers may not be around in general. And then I had a chance when I was the Secretary of Tourism for Louisiana to really interact at the state capitol with folks from Dixon Correctional Center who would come and clean the state capitol and that sort of thing, and to be able to interact with them and hear their stories. And there were really some really heart-wrenching stories out there. I really felt compelled as a servant of God, but also as a person who cares about others, to make sure that if I start a ministry, involved in a ministry, that part of that ministry would help ex-offenders and it help their families also along the journey. I think sometimes we leave the families out, but the families too of those that are incarcerated, because I was one of those.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Graham?
Well, I mean, if I'm going to be honest, coming out of law school, I was, maybe a naive idealist, and you're taught that not Louisiana, but the legal system in the United States is the ideal. It's what everybody else should strive to achieve. And I actually started my practice or my career in the district attorney's office, and there were some early signs that might not actually have been true. I grew up in Hollygrove, and I saw guys who looked like the kids I grew up with, treated differently, frankly, than other people who were coming through the system. I think I still believed that justice was possible, that the system still had the potential to work, up until I started my criminal defense practice and started working with the public defender's office in Jefferson Parish. And I've told this story a lot recently, but there's this one case early on in my practice in JP, where I had an individual who was he was charged with a rape. I mean, it was a pretty heinous allegation. And the accuser had a sexually transmitted disease, so I had my client tested. He didn't have the sexually transmitted disease. And I had him tested for the antibodies. Didn't have the antibodies. He had never actually had the sexually transmitted disease. So, I remember going to the prosecutor and saying, I mean, it looks like the allegation here is false. And the prosecutor's like, no, it doesn't matter what else this accuser may have been doing. She's still saying that your guy has done this. So I found out that they had genetic material from the alleged rape. So I had the DNA test. I got the funding together to test it, and I excluded my client as the actual contributor of the genetic material, and basically then proved through DNA evidence that he couldn't have been the person who had committed the alleged offense. And I went back to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor said, I'm taking it to trial anyway. And I remember going to the trial truly believing that justice would prevail and the system would work. And the accuser took the stand and said, cried and said, I don't know why the DNA evidence says otherwise. He did it. And I remember standing in front of the jury and saying, people have reasons to lie. There are thousands of reasons why people could lie, but science doesn't lie. I mean, the DNA in here is all that matters. And the jury came back, because Louisiana has responsive verdicts and allows for an attempt, came back with an attempt, which is just kind of like a make-believe compromise that the jury came to, which was kind of bad enough. The problem was my client had lifted 2 door handles when he was 18 years old and had 2 burglary convictions for entering cars. And the prosecutor filed a triple life bill and put him in jail for the rest of his life, despite the fact that the DNA evidence exonerated him. And I remember looking at the judge and saying, Judge, you have seen everything. You know all the evidence here. I'm filing a post-verdict judgment. Acquittal, you have to grant this. And the judge did nothing. I filed a motion for a new trial. The judge did nothing. The Fifth Circuit, it was JP. The appellate court did nothing. The Supreme Court did nothing. And I remember at that point coming to this hard realization, because I mean, you believe that the system is supposed to work, but the system doesn't work. And it was a hard lesson. And at that point, I got involved in criminal justice reform. I joined the Sentencing Commission. I started working with business leaders and community leaders to draft legislation to address a lot of these inequities. I worked on the juvenile life legislation, and I've been involved in it for the past 10 years. I joined the Bar Association's Criminal Justice Committee. I eventually was named chair. I worked with subcommittees that I've appointed to draft white papers on the inequities of the cash bail system. I mean, this is something that I've been committed to, because through my 15 years of practice, I realized that the system needs help, and it needs people who are committed to change, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much, Graham. Oliver.
I grew up in the lower ninth ward of New Orleans, and listening to everybody and kind of thinking about how did you come to this work. When you grow up, where some of us grow up, you kind of do the work and not know it. It's your friends, it's your community, and then sometimes it's you. So now that I think about it, the work in our community, just because of how we live and how it affected us, started a long time ago. But after and post, when I came home, post incarceration, I really got committed to the work because, I would go to meetings with some of my friends who were formerly incarcerated. I'd be around groups, and I would listen to the stories, and I would kind of compare them to my life. Now, even though I grew up in the lower nine and life wasn't always easy, I had educated myself through athletics and, getting my degrees and going to school, getting good jobs. And when I was in politics, I developed good relationships. So I never forget being in the meeting with formerly incarcerated men and women, and they were talking about their struggles in finding employment, and finding just justice and fairness in society. And I thought, wow, man, they deserve the same opportunities as me. Just because I'm a former person with a title, a former elected official, just because I've had an education, and just because I have important relationships, they ought to have access to the same things that I have access to. And I just thought it was blatantly unfair that I could go through something, and then my friends could go through something, and then the outcomes for success could be totally different. And I just thought that wasn't good enough, and it wasn't acceptable. So I fight to make sure that everybody has the same opportunities, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter your celebrity, no matter your resources. That's why I'm committed to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Oliver. Thank all of you for kind of giving us a little peek into why you're in this work. We're going to go ahead and jump right into some questions. We have a lot of them. So if I'm going to ask the question, and there are a few that I've sort of picked out, like certain people would be really good to answer, but also if you want to jump in, if you want to answer any question, just feel free. Just let me know and unmute yourself. All right, so our first question is, how does incarceration drive up crime rates, and what statistical evidence do you have that alternative solutions will drive down crime rates? Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, I'll get it started. So when the question asks what hard statistical evidence do you have to that alternative solutions that will drive down the crime rates, that was work that the Sentencing Commission actually took on. We studied what other southern states in the United States were doing with their incarceration rates and the effect that it had on their crime rates. We looked at Texas, we looked at Georgia, we looked at Alabama, we looked at South Carolina, we looked at Florida, and we looked at Mississippi. I think we may have also looked at Tennessee. And what we found was states that worked to decrease their incarceration rates actually saw decreases statistically in their crime rates. You had Texas. I think Texas ended up closing down 2 prisons over the course of the past 10 years by decreasing their incarceration rates, and they saw at the same time a decrease in their crime rates. I think South Carolina actually had the same statistical evidence that was out there. So there is statistical evidence that decreasing your incarceration rates actually does have a benefit. And the flip side is also true. We incarcerate more people per capita than any place else on the planet. if incarceration actually made us safer, if it actually drove down crime rates, we'd be the safest place on the planet. But our crime rates are the same as most other states in the Southeast U.S. I think basically consistent with the country as a whole. So, we know that incarceration does not equate decreased crime rates, and there's now statistical evidence that decreased incarceration actually does in fact drive down crime rates. And I mean, the question as to why there is this correlation with higher crime incarceration rates and crime rates. I mean that's more anecdotal. It's not that surprising when you're incarcerating the number of people we are in Louisiana, when you have so many people serving 40, 50, 60, 70-year sentences, life sentences. The DOC facilities where drug treatment programs, job training, rehabilitation programs generally are available are full of people who aren't coming back necessarily anytime soon. The people who are getting the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, 10-year sentences, the people who are coming back, and 95% of people who go to jail in Louisiana come back, are sitting in parish prisons because our jails are so full. They don't have access to the same programs. They come back, they have the stigma of incarceration, they have no job training, they have no drug treatment, and recidivism occurs. In the meantime, you have families like Chuck was just talking about who they lose their family members, they lose parents. You have children who don't necessarily have father figures in their life. It's no surprise that this does create a cycle of crime and arrest. And there's one case that I had recently that, really, I think for me hammered this home. I had a client who was charged with a DWI. And I was working with the district attorney's office to get him alternative to incarceration, probation, treatment. And the judge was determined that he had to go to jail. Punishment had to be what happened. He didn't believe in rehabilitation. He didn't believe that anything other than punishment was appropriate for the DWI. And as a result, my client ended up going to jail for 19 months. Spent 19 months on a cot someplace. And when he came back, he couldn't get a job. He was, dealing with the stigma of actually having been in jail. And as a result, he fell into depression. He had no drug treatment. He fell into drug use, and he died of an overdose within a few months of coming back. That's obviously the worst case scenario. But that cycle, that's what we're fueling when we're just sticking people in jail.
Thanks, Graham. Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
Well, can you hear me, Britt?
Yes.
The data is already there. Since the war on drugs or the war on black men and black people, it's proven that if you take a humanitarian approach, you get humanitarian outcomes. The tough on crime didn't work at all. But as I think about it, they created an environment that if your community or a part of your community, if all it has to look forward to is going to prison and not going home or going to work, that's the kind of environment that the criminal justice system or law enforcement created. When you create an environment where folk can look forward to going home, look forward to going to work, then they do the work that gets them there, even if they make minor mistakes. So for me, you don't even have to have statistical data. You can just look at the last several decades and the outcomes to show that anytime you've taken a humanitarian approach, anytime you've taken an approach that when people make mistakes, we ought to offer opportunities to overcome those mistakes, the outcomes have always been positive.
And also, if I could just say one thing to add to what Oliver's saying is that I truly believe that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And oftentimes when people are re-enter, they don't think that people care about them. There aren't opportunities for them to really be gainfully employed and get back into the system. So I think the humanitarian perspective, the caring perspective is the way to do that so that people will have an opportunity. I think people feel like they are just castaways. And we have to really, really, really show that we truly, truly care about them. And not only caring and talking, caring and providing real opportunities for them to succeed. I think sometimes we talk a lot and we provide some opportunities, but it's not the real opportunities, not to the fullest extent, to get them back into society in a way that is going to sustain them for a long term.
Yeah, it's a great point. All right, y'all. Does anyone else want to jump in before we move on to the next question?
I would add just one point about the fact that a felony conviction and an arrest record opens people up to being legally discriminated against, right? Like we've prohibited largely, you know, the discrimination on the basis of race within housing and employment. But the way that we get around that now is discrimination on the basis of an arrest record or of a misdemeanor or felony conviction. And Louisiana leads the country in employment barriers for people with felony records when it comes to professional licensing. And even the areas where it is supposed to be illegal and it's not supposed to happen, it's largely unregulated and people don't have access to the resources they need to show that they were illegally discriminated against. And so when we're putting, as Oliver noted, you know, when we're talking about a crisis that has uniquely impacted Black and Brown communities, what we've done is we've set up an entire population, an entire group of people that cannot legally rejoin the workforce and cannot access housing. And so I think too, though, when we think about that, there are incredible barriers to people rejoining the workforce. It does happen, and people work incredibly hard. And while we've scaled back in Louisiana technical violations for not working when you come home from prison and while you're on parole, a lot of other states still will consider that a technical violation and reincarcerate you. The question then, though, becomes that people are working for poverty wages. And even if they are able to rejoin the workforce, they're not making enough to live and survive. And one, I think, misconception about people that end up in prison or end up back in prison is that they just weren't working or were just entirely sustaining themselves on illegal activity. And that's just not true. But the reality is that when you have people who are working legal jobs, but then also might be supplementing their income through illegal activities, we really have to confront what's going on in our economy that's forcing people into the illicit economy if they are working full time. And just try to drive that home, I think we have to talk more openly about the fact that you cannot support yourself working full time on minimum wage. That doesn't happen. And to think about the fact that we have people that can't earn enough to live but are working 40 plus hours a week is a real atrocious and horrific reality for our country.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. All right, I think this next question will probably start out with Graham. It says, how big of a role do you think the money bail system plays in our incarceration rate? And a specific follow-up with that in mind is, as judge, is there a way to mitigate that role?
Short answer, a lot. I mean, my personal belief is that the bail system and the multiple bill system are the two biggest driving factors in Louisiana's incarceration rates. And I mean, there's a number of reasons for it. When you have money bail and judges feel obligated to then impose money bail, even when it's not statutorily required, but kind of as a protecting themselves, kind of a scenario, it's there and, you know, they should use it. The end result is people are in jail often for no other reason than they can't afford their bail. When someone is in jail simply because they can't afford their bail, they're more likely to just accept a plea in order to get out of jail. I mean, it's unconscionable. It should never, ever, ever happen. The fact that we have a system where, you know, one person who's charged with one crime has the ability to make bond and get out and then actually fight their charge, whereas someone else doesn't have the ability to make bond, even if it's the exact same charge, and will take a plea simply to go home. That's that is not due process. That is not justice, and it's something that I truly believe the money bail system has played into. And then once you have a conviction, as you know, Kelly was just talking about, that there's a snowball effect, and you end up back in the system, and then the multiple bill comes into play. It's a problem, and it is a system that drives incarceration rates, and it starts in large part with money bail. And unfortunately, it's also used by some judges to like twist arms in order to get convictions. When you have to make bail in order to get on a charge, even though you're presumed innocent, you are deemed to be out as a privilege, not as a matter of right. You're subjected to random drug tests in a way that a private citizen wouldn't be. A judge can say, I'm going to make you take a drug test today, and if you happen to have, I don't know, smoked marijuana or something, which might have nothing to do with your charge, all of a sudden you're faced with getting thrown back in jail, and the judge is like, well, if you take this plea today, it's over. That is, again, I mean, people should be able to fight their charges without being punished for a presumption of guilt, which, in my personal estimation, a lot of these cash bail systems or money bail systems drive. And it has a real effect on incarceration rates. That has a real effect on conviction rates. And again, because convictions drive future problems, which drive future criminal behavior on occasion, in conjunction with multiple bail, it has a dramatic effect on our incarceration rate. There was a second part. What does the judge can I do to mitigate that role? When the law allows, when someone hasn't been established to be a danger to society, you don't make them pay bond in order to get out. You make sure that everyone has an equal ability to be heard in the courtroom, regardless of their economic resources. I think that's imperative for judges. I think any system that doesn't do that is broken. And I think as a judge, you can't lobby, but you can certainly educate. And using your role as a judge to educate about the detrimental effect of the bail system when there are other systems that are in place and are used all over the country is, I think, an appropriate use of that platform.
Thank you so much, Graham. Does anyone else want to jump in on that one?
I said earlier that, how do you go from a $120 moving violation to $6,000 because you had the inability or you got a bench warrant because you missed a court date for a moving violation to be arrested. And again, it's like feeding something. It's weird that we think we got to feed this monster and that this monster will ever be satisfied every time we feed it. It won't. It's insatiable. And so we have to kill the monster. That's the only thing. That's the only solution. We got to change the money bail system because it'll never be satisfied. You heard Graham say that, judges feel obligated. Why do you feel obligated? Why do you think you feel obligated to the money bailers? And then, and why do they have access to DAs and everyone else where the defendant don't? The system is broken when it comes to that. So you got to have alternatives, and people really need to know that if you miss one payment or you can't make bail, do you have a job at that time? But you couldn't make bail to get out, so you lost your job, so you lost your ability to pay to begin with. And so what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to dispense justice, or are we just trying to feed this monster? And I feel sometimes they're just trying to feed the monster.
Thank you so much. Anyone else want to hop in on that before we move on? All right. Michael, Oliver, and Kelly, you might be a little extra interested in answering this one. Do you believe there are scenarios in which re-entry is not possible? And how do you propose we handle those scenarios if you believe that they exist? Who wants to start?
Well, first of all, I'll start. Re-entry is literally impossible too often for too many people because you don't have real re-entry. The first 72 is has been cited as being one of the best re-entry programs in the South. They've won awards around this region in this part of the country, and literally get no money from the local community, and they're the best re-entry program. I used to speak at the Sheriff's Re-entry program and work with those guys when it was at OPP. Well, the state, so it could justify that multi-million-dollar monstrosity they built in Plaquemines, they moved the re-entry program to Plaquemines Parish when most of the folk who need re-entry live and reside in OPP pass through parish prison. So yeah, reentry is made impossible a lot of times because the system makes it impossible. Now, for an individual, is reentry impossible for an individual? Well, if the work hadn't started before they enter that 100-day pre-release period, if the work hasn't started to get them ready to come home, and then especially if there isn't something on the other side to welcome them, even if they haven't done the work. So I think it's really part of the process and part of the connection, but a lot of times reentry is made impossible because there is no real reentry.
I definitely agree with Oliver on all of his points, especially about the first 72 plus. But yeah, no, I think he's so right on with that. Reentry is impossible for almost anybody. It is just unreal what people are confronted with when they come home from prison. And I think there's been some really interesting work that Vote has been doing to really study the process of people taking pleas and how much people are just unaware of and not made aware of when they enter into that plea. And as you know, Graham noted, there are a lot of reasons why people plead guilty, but people I don't think are prepared for just how incredibly troubling and what a struggle it's going to be once you come home from prison, or once you're even just released from jail if you took a plea to community supervision time, and the reality of what it's like to live under community supervision. So I completely agree with his point. I think that it seems like maybe the spirit of the question is sort of getting at this idea of, you know, the dangerous few. And if there are people that are just irredeemable that we put in prison, and how could we ever let them come home without just causing tremendous harm and danger in our communities? And I think that that's always a really seductive intellectual, you know, thing to think about. You know, what are we going to do with folks that just pose this tremendous risk? The reality is, while there are certainly people out there who hurt other people, there's certainly a lot of violence in our community. There's also, Bruce was talking about this before the panel started, where there's the issue of trauma and just and what trauma does to our community. And so while I don't think, I had the privilege of interviewing over 400 people who were in prison for rape, murder, and kidnapping. And that was an incredible opportunity to really get to know a lot of people that we think we understand and know a lot about, but not many people have gotten the opportunity to really get to know. And I didn't meet a single monster that I just thought that just could never be released from this facility. What I met were a lot of people with a lot of untreated trauma, and people that had stories. And if we had a system that allowed judges and the people who have the power to prosecute them and the people who are empowered to defend them, if we really had enough time to get to know the people that we're locking up, we would absolutely approach it the other way. And so a simple answer, I don't think that there are just people that I have yet to meet a monster that I just think that we should not ever consider an alternative method for. But the reality is that it's impossible for everyone to come home from prison if they don't have an unlimited amount of resources to get them and keep them safe.
Can I add? I know Michael's going to talk in a second, but I just really hear what Kelly just said, and I agree with what Kelly said. And as she interviewed 400 people, and she didn't really find there was any monsters that if we let reenter, that they will be devastating to the community. I mean, we all got stories, we all have histories, and you know, I just as a minister, and I got to put my Reverend hat on now. So it's hard to think that somebody is irredeemable. That there's a person out there, there's no way that person can allow to come out. So I just think we got to understand how hard it is once you get out, but also understand their stories and their backgrounds and people. Everybody, some of the people that you think are the worst people in the world may not be as bad as you think they are. So I think we need to really think about that question and whether or not that makes sense or not at all. It should be, the question maybe should be more, is there an opportunity for them once they reenter versus whether anybody should be reentered?
Mm-hmm.
I agree with all that. I think first, reentry can be beneficial if the true purpose is being fulfilled. It goes back to accountability. You know, if people are really being reformed, it will be successful, you know. And that's my take, because I agree with Mr. Oliver and Ms. Kelly, Chuck, all y'all. It goes back to that. I believe that it can be. If everybody's doing a part of it, it will be successful.
Thank you so much. All right, y'all. Our next question is, most of the talk surrounding alternatives to incarceration is in the context of non-violent offenses. What does it look like in the case of violent crime? Are there alternatives for people who have murdered people? So basically, what can we look at for alternatives for violent crime?
I mean, a lot of people are afraid to deal with this because depending on the level of violence or what category it was in, you know, that's so heinous that that person has to be outcast for life. But the reality is, most people, even those who are involved in violent crime, they come back home. So, you know, I said something. I spoke when I came back home from vacation. I spoke at an institution, and I never forget. You know, and I said that, especially for Louisiana, Louisiana should probably give everybody who goes to prison life. And so folk looked at me like I was crazy, right? And I was like, well, okay, if you're not going to help prepare me to come home, and you're not going to be prepared for me to come home, then you're only making it so that I can go back or earn my way back. But yeah, most people who commit violent crimes are coming home anyway. Everybody doesn't have life in prison. So it seems like to me it would be obvious and makes sense that we look at their lives as being redeemable and give them their coupon to redeem once they step across that municipality's boundaries. To me, it just makes sense.
I think a lot of this ties into what Kelly was talking about when she was making the point that our system doesn't really take the time to kind of investigate the facts and circumstances around individuals and the offense themselves, and really just kind of rushes cases through to trial. I mean, I think if you were to be able to radically change the system and you were to radically rethink the nature of prosecution and really address, you know, more of a holistic approach to prosecution, in order to say, what do we need to do in order to make sure that this doesn't happen again, in conjunction with that this person comes out better than they went in? I think the answer is yes, there are alternatives to incarceration, even for violent offenses. And you actually see some of that in the law now. I mean, when you talk about murder, if someone is convicted of murder, they go to jail for life, and life means life in Louisiana. But you could be convicted of manslaughter, at which point the judge has the ability to give you probation. You could be convicted of negligent homicide, in which you're in the same situation. So the law, even as it exists now, accepts the fact that there are alternatives to incarceration, even for violent offenses. But what the law doesn't do, and what the system really frankly doesn't do, is enough of what Kelly was talking about, more of a case-by-case individual, what actually happened here. Do we need as a system to come down and say, you know, we have to punish this person so somebody else doesn't do it? Has there really been enough analysis into whether or not that actually works in terms of you know, convincing future people not to commit the same offense? When you talk about death penalty research, there's, as far as I know, a growing body and an established body of research that says, you know, the mere existence of the death penalty doesn't actually affect murder rates. So when you start taking this more kind of holistic approach, are there ways to say this case can be resolved in this way where incarceration isn't actually necessary? I mean, I think yes, the answer is yes. But the system as it exists now is not set up to really address that, even though we do have statutory regimes like manslaughter and negligent homicide that actually do a lot.
I agree, and I think that while we're talking about crimes of violence, what we're thinking about, murder, very, very serious crimes where there was a loss of life, for instance. But if you look at the crimes of violence statute within Louisiana, that includes 54 individual crimes that are not all murder, that are not all crimes that you would really think of when you envision the concept of violence. I mean, we have purse snatching on there, we have simple robbery on there as a crime of violence. And while we can certainly imagine fact patterns that would suggest that a purse snatching could be very violent, in my time as a public defender, the facts that I was presented with a lot of crimes of violence were not what the spirit of this idea was meant to capture. And so, while I absolutely do agree, and I actually think it's a really false and dangerous dichotomy to do nonviolent versus violent, because it's not really getting at the spirit of what we're trying to do, which is to not have a system that's so reliant on incarceration when it's shown to not work, it's shown to not make our communities safer. We also need to really think even immediately that there are available alternatives to incarceration right now in Louisiana that people are not eligible for because they've been convicted of a crime of violence, and that statute alone is wildly over-inclusive of crimes that it's not. I don't think anybody would agree. I don't think anyone would disagree that it should be categorized that way.
And if I can jump back in, another subject here that we haven't really touched on, but it is germane to this question, is mental health. The state of Louisiana, and frankly the country at large, does not prioritize and it does not fund mental health treatment. Mental health treatment is almost de facto handled through the criminal justice system. If the state were to fund mental health treatment, if the state were to train police officers to recognize mental health and actually divert people from the criminal justice system in the first place when they were to investigate situations where the police were called in. If mental health was something that was really investigated in terms of whether or not someone should be prosecuted in the first place, what you would find is that with a robust mental health treatment system, again, that would mean that yes, there are more and more situations where even in crimes of violence, there are alternatives to incarceration. And frankly, we shouldn't be using our criminal justice system to handle mental health issues in the first place.
Well, let me say that that's absolutely correct, Graham, that mental health is a big issue within our state. And the mere fact of being handcuffed, processed, put into jail, that will affect your psyche to begin with. And that can cause harm to already a fragile mind under those circumstances. And we said before that incarceration doesn't prevent future incarceration. I grew up in the Ninth Ward of New Orleans, and we had guys go to jail all the time, and going to jail didn't deter the guys in our neighborhood from stealing and doing other stuff. It wasn't deterred. What deterred us was a close-knit community that held us accountable for our behavior, and the consequences was coming from them and not from the criminal justice system. And we have to get back to that community that it takes a whole village. We got to get back to that because we in our country, we have become too individualized. It's all about me, my brand that I have to focus on and put out there. And if it doesn't benefit me personally, then I'm not going to be part of it. And it has dire consequences of the community of a whole. And that has brought into the psyche of our children. And then Louisiana, again, this insatiable appetite to incarcerate mentally ill people, because I actually took care of my uncle who was a Vietnam War veteran and who was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, and he was living in the 5th district. And after a few arrests, the 5th district police officers started to recognize, okay, we know who this guy is. But the first few arrests, I had to go down to all these parishes and talk to the ward and say, look, man, I got all his papers here. He's 100% VA connected. This is his situation. He's mentally ill. And as you said before, a lot of our police officers are trained to arrest potential criminals and not deal with people. And they need to stop looking at the public as potential perks and start looking at them as people who have been potentially harmed. And I think that's the whole attitude, especially when we talk about what is violent and what is not violent, because again, some things that I perceive as being violent is totally different with what they call statutory law. And I think it's a violent act to be incarcerated for jaywalking. To me, that's a violent act. To me, that tears my psyche down, because merely you gonna put handcuffs on me because I jaywalked, that tears my psyche up. So when we talk about violence, like she said before, that there's 54 different laws about or what they consider as being violent that we won't even consider as being violent nowadays. That's something we can deal with, and until again, we have community panels like this that we could talk, that people can know what is actually going on and get involved with the criminal justice system. And people need to realize that the criminal justice system is for the people. It's not for the judges. It's not for the DA. It's not for the jail or the warden. It's for the community. And the community should have a right to know how it is ran, and should have a right to change it when it does not meet our expectations.
Wow, that's deep. I'm not sure how many more questions you have. So I don't want to jump out of turn, but there's one piece of advice I'd like to give Graham before he becomes the next judge, and that is I'd love to see him three things: facilitate, link, and leverage. I think we need to facilitate the conversations about who out here is serving ex-offenders. The Kellys of the world. Kelly is a wonderful, First 72 Plus is great. We meet at the coffee shop at the corner, build a great relationship. We work together. But there's a bunch of Chucks and Kellys out there. There's TSAP, there's mental health, there's a bunch of needs. If you could help facilitate or map who those organizations are to help as it relates to reentry. And then if you could leverage, facilitate, link us together, help us come together in a real way, which includes funding and things like that. So there won't be competition about funding. There's funding for all, because we know how we can work together. Then if you can leverage the dollars that's in our city. We were just Thrive was just awarded the National Disaster Resilience Operator for the city of New Orleans. That's a $3 million contract. So our job is to train about 175 individuals on stormwater management, green infrastructure. We're going to be partnering with Bruce and Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. We want to be able to train ex-offenders. So I'm going to be reaching out to Kelly and other folks, and TSAP and other folks. We know that to train them, we need more than just getting them to training. They need wraparound services. So if this could be my last statement of the day: facilitate, link, Graham, and leverage.
I think that's incredibly important, and every judge in the building should be doing that and working together collectively with all of the community service providers so that we can work together to make sure that everybody comes out of this better than they went in.
I really appreciate you saying that. I think that's kind of a great note to end on. I do want to give everyone in here a chance, because we've just hit 3 p.m., so I don't want to keep people too long. But I think it's so important that, while you're here, if there are any sort of calls to action you have for people from the community that might be watching this about how they can get involved in criminal justice reform, I'd love to give everyone an opportunity to sign off with that before we shut down.
Well, before I go back to this function, I think that's a good way to end on it. I think Pastor Morse has given our judicial candidate a call to action, but I think that call to action is for all of us, is how do we come together and leverage what each of us do to make sure that we have real reentry, real opportunity, but also real humanity about how we reincorporate people into our society again. So for me, I know Graham and I do a lot of work together. I work with some of the people on this panel, and I work in this area. But connectivity has always been a problem. Collaboration has always been a problem. Too often we've not had a lack of resources come through this town to study, how dysfunctional they think we are and how out of the box and violent they think we are. So it hasn't been a lack of resources, but the resources haven't been collaborated and haven't been worked together to make sure we're overcoming some of the challenges and some of the problems. So I think that that's what I'm gonna take from this, is not only continue the work that I'm doing, but make sure I'm intentional and strategic about working with the people on this panel and the people who are doing this work. Thank y'all very much, guys.
Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Does anyone else want to share sort of some calls to action before we head out?
I'd just like to say that I'd like to follow up with Oliver just said and make sure that there's open communication with Chuck and Bruce and Kelly and me, regardless of what happens in November. I'd really like to be involved in the work that you all are doing because it's incredibly important, and collectively we can make the city a better place for everyone, and I'd like to remain involved in the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
I would just add to vote, make sure you're registered, vote, request your ballot now, but also to serve on juries and to respond to jury summons. Give a little quick shout out to the Juror Project and to figure out how to make sure, that you're taking advantage of that civic duty.
Yeah, I definitely back up the voting, All right. Anyone else have anything?
Just thank you for the opportunity, Graham and the team, for being part of the conversation.
Yeah, this was such a good conversation. I know there's like so many questions that we didn't get to, so hopefully we can do another round at some point, get some more folks together. But yeah, I really appreciate this. This was fantastic.
Let's do it. Round 2.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank y'all so much. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.